I want to thank Cass for coming up with this idea because she mentioned something during one of our Wednesday night meetings about Carl Jung and this idea of synchronicity that he called it. And if you're a physics guy or a technical guy, synchronicity probably means something similar but different. And we'll talk about all these things. And I'm going to propose to you a model that gives you some insight into how I think we perceive the world. And I'm going to use that to explain the concept of déjà vu. And so I just wanted to let you know all my examples are kind of experiential and personal for the most part. And so I overlook that, if you would, but I think they're meaningful. Turn on the light so I can see. There's several issues that, if this will work. Here we go, issues, all right. So there's several things we need to talk about. First of all is the idea of cause and effect. And that I think is fairly straightforward. It is what makes the world go round as far as I'm concerned, being a physicist. It's cause and effect. The current state will affect what the next state will be, if you want to think of it in terms of little time steps. There are such things as simultaneous events, or are there such things as simultaneous events? I'm going to use the eagle has landed as an example of that, and we'll talk about that. And finally, are there hidden meanings in coincidental events? And this is where Carl Jung comes in, and we'll talk about that. At first, I kind of poo-pooed the idea in some sense, but on the other hand, I got to understand what he was, I think I understand what he was trying to do. And I think it's a very meaningful concept, okay? Especially if you're a psychoanalyst. I'm going to talk a little bit about the mind maybe as a pattern recognizing machine, right? Recognition machine. We're very good at that as people. And then we've talked a little bit about the déjà vu thing, as I said, which is part of a memory is kind of a feedback loop, which will explain that. And I've said many times, you've probably heard me say this many times, experiences form the filter to the objective world. Our sum total of our experiences are kind of held in a simplified model of the world. It makes making decision whether there's a lion going to pounce on you or not much easier to make a quick decision. And finally, one that I think somebody needs to address, and I may do it if you all don't, and that's this law of attraction. Probably most people have heard of that. There are several documentaries some out there, and you can download and look at. Some of them are a little cheesy, I guess. But on the other hand, I think there's something behind it that has validity. And so there's ways of summarizing that. Maybe we can talk about that and talk back a little bit more. Okay. Here's the kind of the three separate things that I wanted to talk about. First of all, these are different relationships that can occur. There's the clear causal relationship. You hit somebody on the head with a stick and it hurts. Produces a clear causal relationship between the hurt and somebody hitting you on the head. That's cause and effect in its worst form, I suppose. So if an event A occurs and an event B occurs, maybe even at the same time, we're slightly apart in time, we can ask ourselves, did A cause B? Or it could be the other way around, did B cause A, if they're really close together. So if the answer to that statement is yes, then we might have a case for a clear causal relationship between two events. If two events occur simultaneously, but one is from a spatially distant source, or moving relative to one another, there may not be a clear causal relationship between these events. Thunder and lightning is one of those. We see the flash, we hear the sound at a different time. They're a distance away from us. It takes time for sound to get there. It takes time for light to get to you. And you can ask yourself the question, are those associated in any way? We know they are, okay? So, but that's not always the case. And then Carl Jung's synchronicity is where simultaneous events occur, but are apparently causally unrelated. And yet there's a belief there's a meaningful relationship behind them. And that does make sense in the sense of somebody will make an association that may be unjustified, but yet if they believe it to be true, that becomes part of their internal reality, and lo and behold, you do all sorts of maybe some crazy things based on that. Or you can take the position, I think, Cass, that you were saying, is that maybe there is something behind all this synchronicity thing that guides it. And for me, as a technical person, we'll talk about that. I think they're cause and effect type things, or it's the nature of the technical community for that to happen. So we'll talk a little bit about that. Okay. Right. Let's see. Why are we not doing this? Let's try that. Here we go. So let's define a coincidence. And coincidence, according to, just a kind of a Merriam-Webster sort of thing, is a remarkable concurrence of events or circumstances without apparent causal connection. They met by coincidence. And there are so many synonyms for it that it's important, I think, in our world to have, if we have a lot of synonyms or things that are very similar ways of saying it, it's usually important. Just like Eskimos have a number of different meanings for snowflakes or for snow. Accident, chance, serendipity, fate, a twist of fate, destiny, fortuity, correspondence in nature or time or occurrence, co-occurrence, coexistence. You're getting the idea. There's a lot there, a lot of different ways of explaining it. But I think normal cause or a coincidence is just two events occurring in time for you. Okay, that is a coincidence. This next example, I just love this one because back in '64, I guess it was, this came out. And it was, of course, after JFK passed. And so somebody started looking, well, these things. So Abraham Lincoln, for example, let me just read through them. They're not all true, by the way. And if Annie were here, she would take umbrage to a couple of them anyway. Abraham Lincoln was elected to Congress in 1846. JFK was elected to Congress in 1946. Abraham Lincoln was elected president in 1860. John F. Kennedy was elected president in 1960. Both wives lost children while living in the White House. Both presidents were shot on a Friday. Both Lincoln and Kennedy were shot from behind in the head while seated. Both were succeeded by men named Johnson. Andrew Johnson, who succeeded Lincoln, was born in 1808. Lyndon Johnson, who succeeded Kennedy, was born in 1908. Booth, who shot Lincoln, I like this one, shot Lincoln, ran from the theater and was caught in a warehouse. Oswald, who shot Kennedy, ran from a warehouse and was caught in a theater. I love it. And this one I know Annie would take umbrage to, and I do too, because I think I know what happened to Booth, and he wasn't burned or brought to trial, I don't believe. I may be wrong. Both Booth and Oswald were assassinated before their trials. So anyway, so that's, for the fun of it, those are coincidences, and you could find them just about anywhere you want to go. So let's talk a little bit about simultaneity. And of course, it's defined as the relationship between two events assumed to be simultaneous, but simultaneous ain't what it used to be. According to Einstein's special theory of relativity, it is impossible to say with absolute sense that the two distinct events occurred at the same time if those events are separated in space. But if there's a causal relationship between the events, precedence will be preserved. In other words, you know enough to say this one was here, it took a finite amount of time for a signal to get to here, another place, and you can relate those as cause and effect kind of things. Okay, that's kind of the definition for that. So what we're going to do next, I'm going to give this one a try. When the Eagle landed on the moon, Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong heard what was going on, not only in the lunar lander, but from Houston as well. But there was a 1.25 second difference between those. Okay, it took one and a quarter seconds for their voices to be heard in Houston, and vice versa, another 1.25 seconds to get back up to the lunar lander. If we were to go to Mars, this becomes a serious issue. It seemed simultaneous for us when they first landed on the moon, because 1.25 seconds is no big deal, but it could be. If you go to Mars, it takes 13 minutes and 48 seconds for that same signal to travel back and forth. And so a major portion of what is going on now is synchronizing events in such a way is that when they land, they will land when they think they should be landing, okay? Major problem. So I'm going to play, I think I can do this. I hope I can do this. Just a second here. As they say, limited resources. Boy, that's the truth. Okay. All right. Okay, so what I'm doing here, I'm going to play for you as we heard it. This is exactly the way we heard it through Houston when they landed. Let's see what happens. We can make this work. Let's hope it works. Let me try doing this again. Oops. Excuse me. I'll try this one more time. Well, this is maybe where it worked well in rehearsal. Let's put it that way.
Contact light. Okay, engine stop. ATA at a descent. Coast control both auto, descent and command over and off. Engine arm on. 413 is in. We copy you down, Eagle. Houston, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed. Roger, Tranquility. We copy you on the ground. You got a bunch of guys about to turn blue. We're breathing again. Thanks a lot.
Okay, that's what we heard here on Earth. Okay, but what did Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin hear? And this one, let's see if I can make this one work now. And let's see if this is going to work. It's a little bit different. This is what they put this one back together. Well, maybe it's not going to work. Okay, we'll just talk our way through this one. Basically, as you would expect, so there's a delay coming from Houston, things would show up 1.25 seconds later. It's a totally different scenario if you hear it from either of those two positions, and that's because things are not simultaneous. They are separated in space and in time, basically, because the speed of light is the controlling factor there. So it's kind of an example, if you wish, of what synchronicity is all about. Okay. Or simultaneity, if you wish. Okay, synchronicity in the Jungian sense is defined as the simultaneous occurrence of events which appear significantly related but have no discernible causal connection. Now, if you're a psychoanalyst, yes, this makes sense to ask this question. So at first, it was introduced by Carl Jung, which holds that events are meaningful coincidences if they occur with no causal relationship. And so if you're trying to understand why a person may be doing something, this might be a useful tool in understanding that. And he called that, in a conference in mid-1930s, he coined the word synchronicity for it. I think that's, like I say, we use it in much different ways. The widow of Winchester Repeating Arms Company, Sarah Winchester, constantly built on her house in San Jose, California. It's a fascinating place to go and visit. There are hundreds of rooms. There are stairs that go to nowhere. There are doors that open on brick walls. It's just a fascinating place. A Boston medium back in the day told her that she ought to leave Hartford, Connecticut, New Haven, Connecticut, and travel west, where she would continuously build a home for herself and to appease the spirits of people who were killed or fallen victim to the Winchester rifle. A little strange connection there between these two really unrelated events that she is dealing with. She's dealing with doing this building of a house, which for her means that it's going to have an effect, but in reality, did it really? It made a great tourist attraction, that's for sure. So that's about all I would like to say for that one. But anyway, that is the idea there. Okay. So Jung's concept holds that events are meaningful coincidences. So that gives rise to somebody basically taking two events, acting on them both as if they were related, and they may not be. But for the realm of technologists and scientists and researchers, synchronicity happens every day in their world. And I'll try to show you kind of why that is the case. The very nature of R&D, research and development, lies at the feet of the mother of invention. Yes, we know that. Curiosity can be the muse of the inventor, the scientist, the engineers, and new ideas rise out of the technologies of the time, thinking about new ways of doing things. So here's kind of a how we work sort of thing. Okay. This little simplified model here is that you kind of start by asking questions, which sounds very you-ish, right? And hang on just a moment. So we're going to go from there. So you ask the question: what is it that you want to do? What do you want to find out? What do you want to prove? That sort of thing. If you all remember the Cheshire Cat in Alice in Wonderland, Alice said to the Cheshire Cat, "Which way should I go?" And she gives a fork in the road, and the Cheshire Cat, with that Cheshire Cat grin, is smiling up in the tree. And the cat asked Alice, "Well, where are you going?" And Alice replied, "I don't know." The cat said that then any road will take you there. But once the objective is defined, where you want to go, suddenly the entire world seems to be rife with all sorts of opportunities to achieve the goal. That is, in a nutshell, the law of attraction. If you have an idea of where you're going, if you have a goal, and I was fortunate enough to have one very early in my life, and so everything, I would filter it through that, okay? And so that was my law of attraction. I believe in it. Nothing particularly mysterious about it. It just says that you're concentrating on something and something comes along, your filters are set so that you just see what you want to see. Daggum, it works out. So, there's other things that we do, especially researchers, which I was one. You do investigating, you observe experimental research, you compare and interpret and apply a model. I always told my guys, you got to have a model for whatever you do. And we won a contract at NASA. I came up with a model for what they were asking, and they bumped us up to do a little bit more. It was more of a kind of a support sort of thing. But when we got through, we were developing a model, health monitoring model for a space shuttle main engine, which is a big deal, okay? And we got promised a lot of money to do that. Well, the program is still going, as they do in NASA. They keep going and going and going, but it's morphed over into other turbo equipment, like jet engines, for example. And my neighbor just down the hill here has been working on that one. So it lives on and on for quite a few years. And then you make a model, and there's a debate all over this. People get together, conferences and so forth, write papers, people read them, and so the technology diffuses out. And sometimes all it takes to make an advancement is a few words from somebody, or some knowledge about how things work in the universe. I knew that optics would scale in a certain way, and we built a program on that. Was measuring signatures for aircraft is what it was, and we had a multi-year program, multi-million-dollar program that was based on my knowledge that was true. It's a physics thing. It was a pure physics thing, so we did it. So that's the way it works sometimes. Okay, all right, what's next? Here's our example of synchronicity in the technical sense, not in the Carl Jungian sense. Okay, the time is World War II, late 1930s, early 1940s. The problem was Allied torpedoes were being jammed by German submarines. Sorry, Peter. and they couldn't send a control signal to the submarine, to the torpedo to change its course. So all the submariners had to do is just detect that it's coming, jink off to one side or the other, and the torpedo just zipped on by them. This was a major problem for the better part of the first part of the war in the Atlantic and in the Pacific, both. So what the solution for this was so-called frequency hopping, for which a patent was issued to its inventor. I know at least Karen knows who she was, and it was used by Allied forces as a means of encrypting control signals. So this is the gal. Enter into the scene Hedwig Eva Marie Kiesler, better known to us as Hedy Lamarr. Her patent number, just kind of take note of that, it's 2,292,387, and it was for a secret communication system granted to Hedy Kiesler Markey, and her husband at the time was named Markey. His name was Gene Markey, a Hollywood screenwriter. And she felt that having her maiden name on that was going to help her. So we've come a long way, but we're not there yet. Okay, so this is one of those cases in the world of literature. There's a lot of examples of poets that take on male names because they felt it would be more, it would be accepted. So anyway, there you go. All right. Here's a picture of her patent. And there's a lot of stuff in here that I recognize. There's oscillators and there's amplifiers and modulators and such like that. Standard stuff for radios at the time, and now even for that matter. And this little thing on the lower left-hand corner over there selects frequencies. That's what it does. But the thing I'm interested in this is what's on the lower right-hand side of that drawing. And that's basically a tape with holes in it that selected the frequency. Now, where does this come in? This starts to get personal, and I'll show you why. So we can ask this question: is it coincidence? Is it simultaneity or synchronicity that all these things kind of came into being at one time? So let's kind of look at the history of some of these things. It started back, some of the ideas that I think are cause for this to happen. The Jacquard loom was in existence around 1804, 1805. And that was a series of cards with holes punched in it that weights would carry strings and cause a pattern to show up in what they were weaving. Step forward. Punch cards. We used to use punch cards all the time to feed our computer programs. And I think I've told the story before that when they wanted to run a simulation of the Russians coming after us in Cheyenne Mountain, they would put this deck on there and there'd be a card on top, and it just said, "This is a simulation." Everything scrambled. They forgot to put the card on the top of the deck, and that we almost were in World War III. Everybody, our troops were scrambled going to Russia, ready to drop the bomb, or bombs, multiple bombs. And I had this knowledge from somebody who was in Cheyenne Mountain when this happened. And some of you may know who that person was, or his brother was, anyway. So at the same time, about that same time, piano players were very popular. They started in the late 1800s. They peaked in popularity in 1924. And they used, of course, holes in a piece of paper that scrolls by, and it selects the frequency to be played on a piano. German military made limited use of that concept in World War I, which of course wasn't called World War I, it was called the Great War. But anyways, World War I. And tunable radios, of course, were really popular around this time. My dad, that was what he spent a lot of time with. He was a ham. A remote radio tuner even existed that could remotely change the station that you were looking at basically the station that you were looking at on a radio from across the room or wherever. AC Nielsen autometer. Now, this may not mean a lot to you, but it means a lot to me because these were installed in radios of people that represented a particular demographic. Whatever you want to pick, farmer, city dweller, whatever. And my dad this was back in right around 1940, he was going up to Wisconsin and finding these people that met that demographic and ask if they would like to be a Nielsen family, if you wish. And that's what he did. So he tracked those things. So a guy named Rahmet and a guy named H.T. Bentley too have an invention which is really close to Hedwig's invention. This is 2004, 88. There's only a couple of thousand patents off. And he got his patent about the same time Hedy Lamarr did. This idea of frequency hopping, you send a signal at a certain time at one frequency, skip to another one, but you know what it is in advance. So the receiver knows where to look. And then you can put together control signals or top secret information or whatever. But the spread spectrum, it's called spread spectrum. And during the war, this was all classified top secret until 1980, and it was called Sig Sally, and that was what it was called. If you've ever heard of that, you probably could hear of, well, you can hear about it now, I'm telling you, but it's out there. It's out to free to, for free to anybody to look at it. The adaptive frequency hopping spectrum, that's another kind of form of things. It's called AFH, adaptive frequency hopping, is incorporated in Bluetooth technology today, and some of you might be using it right now. Katie might even be using it, I don't know. So what I want to talk to you about a little bit here is, let's see, where are we? Well, okay, we're just done that. I'm trying to find this one. All right, here we go. Anyway, the synchronicity does happen all the time in the real world. And I use the word much the same way that Jung might have used it if it was real. If it was, you're observing something that had a counterpart in the objective world. My father enjoyed connections of this type. He was a ham radio operator from almost year one. He was constantly meeting new people on the air. And my favorite connection that he talked about every now and again was that he made a connection literally halfway around the world using Morse code on 4 watts of power. That's the equivalent of a nightlight, an incandescent nightlight. He was able to work all the way around the world using skip. I've forgotten where it was. It was Taiwan or some places where he connected with. Interesting. There's also another serendipitous sort of thing, meeting that my father made with a young man by the name of Richard Freeman. And Richard went to school with me, and he got a BS degree in applied physics. And he came to work at a place called AEDC. My dad got a hold of him on radio, and he said, Tom, you ought to go. He probably called me Tommy at the time. I hate to admit that. Anyways, you need to meet this guy. You need to go talk to him. So I looked him up, and we arranged when he came back. But during the summer months, I worked on his side of town in Charlotte, and we got together at Shoney's and smoked pipes and things that I would never do now. And he ended up convincing me that AEDC was a great place to go. Not only did they have crows and all sorts of other things and deer and everything. I got a deer in my backyard, and the crows bother me every morning, and that's fine. Wonderful. The interesting coincidental thing was that I got married, finished a degree, came here on Labor Day in 1966. Several things happened on that day. Richard Freeman decided to join the Navy, become a doctor, a medical doctor, a pediatrician, which he did. He served in the Navy, and when he was through, he moved to Opelika, Alabama. Several of my friends that I run into from time to time know Richard very well because they grew up in Opelika as well. And all this time while he was here, he was staying at the couches. So Fran and Candy Couch heard his call letters over and over and over again. So if you find Fran or Candy, ask them what Richard Freeman's call letters were. They'll recite them. They knew them. They heard them millions of times over, just as I did. And I've got my dad's call signs up here on the wall. So you hear that over and over and over. And that particular one was W9QYP, and when we were in Roanoke, it was WGPS, the vacuum tube station. Grids, plates, and screens, the components of a vacuum tube. So my dad was in technical sales, met hospital administrators, purchasing agents, many people all the time. And in the war years, as I said, he worked for AC Nielsen, a now well-known polling group. And I found out doing the research on this thing that his title was statistician. And that's interesting. And I love statistics in high school and in college. And I took a graduate level course in statistics my freshman year, and just because I was interested in it. Didn't know why. Maybe this had something to do with it. So maybe there is that sense of something else in the background. So there's some other coincidences. It keeps on going on, and this is law of attraction, perhaps. He worked for Motorola Communications, and they did two-way radio systems for hospitals and for cities, for their police force and that sort of thing. There are more interesting connections, and they keep going on and on. My mother, Jan, taught her younger brother, Ben, my uncle, photographic techniques, and I have in my garage the same things that she used developing pictures in the late 20s. During World War II, Ben served in a photo recon group in Europe. And after the war, he invented something called Parker Heat Seal albums. It was a whole thing that meant a lot to the family, but there's millions of these things out there. My uncle made his fortune based on that. My dad ended up working for him for a while. He ended up going and having a couple of photo shops of his own and retired in Charlotte. And that was kind of an interesting thing. Nowadays, all you got to do is reach in your pocket, pull out your phone, and you've got all your pictures right there. So this was an earlier technology, and it was an obvious step up. So I would often ask him at dinner, and this was, I found fascinating. I always did. I would ask this more than once. I said, Dad, what connections do you have? What did you find today? And he would tell me a story 9 times out of 10 of where he met somebody, and there's these strange connections. They weren't all that strange because they were usually through his ham radio friends. Okay. Made a lot of sense. Okay, so what we're going to do now, there's more notes. We'll pass it. We'll go to the next one. All right, this little thing is my model of how brain processes work. And in researching this, I found out that there are people using similar ideas to this. If you look in the upper left-hand corner, there's external world, what I call the real world, what physicists would call the real world. It's that which we can observe, touch, feel. And those sensory inputs, our 5 senses, mostly vision for this example. So we got those provide a data experience for the human mind, okay? It goes to what I'm calling an internal subjective reality model, for want of anything else. And that is a simplified model of how the world works. And that's what it is. And it's sort of similar to training a neural net. So what you see is familiar, what's coming in, what you see is familiar experience, the internal subjective model matches what your senses say. You say, yeah, I've seen this before. Well, you just saw it before, okay? And if it's yes, the body responds with what I call an aha response. And that does a number of things for us. The brain starts reinforcing those axons that connect to other neurons. And there's millions of them. There's trillions of them. In fact, the average person probably has 100 trillion axons going between all these little neurons. If you get this aha experience, that releases endorphins or whatever it does, chemical stuff that I don't even know about, but things that we're probably familiar with, that causes the brain to reinforce those paths that just occurred, that were just laid down in the brain to make up that internal reality model. Okay, we'll leave that. So deja vu, basically, if you want to explain deja vu, that's the explanation for it. You actually store it in your internal reality model, short-term memory, if you wish, that can become long-term memory if it's reinforced enough, and you get this aha experience, and that is that feeling in deja vu. Fred Heltze, a friend of mine, some of you know Fred, back in the 60s, I'd go into his office and Fred would say, be very quiet, don't move quickly. Well, what that was code to me was that he was having a deja vu moment and he wanted to see how long he could keep that going. If you don't move very fast, if things don't change very fast every time your brain gets new data, you can keep that going for a long time, we found out. And that was pretty cool. So that's the beginning of that. So with that, and we're getting near the end, so don't panic. I've got a poem. I always have to have a poem. And guess what? This one is a haiku poem. And it actually does have the right number of syllables for the way we do it. And it says, I have deja vu. Why do things keep repeating? I have deja vu. So that's the deja vu poem. All righty. So we're about at the end. So here's kind of conclusions that I've drawn, and there are probably other conclusions that you can draw from all this. And I would strongly suggest that you might want to take a look at those things in your life and see why they happened, where there were coincidences that we may not have thought much about, but they're there, our lives, who we met and who we married and all that. I've got a whole bunch of things along those lines too, but I'm not going to bore you with those. I've probably bored you enough, I'm sorry. So one, I would say coincidences occur rather frequently, especially in the technical world, okay, all the time. Coincidences may appear to occur simultaneously, but they may not, okay? This is Einstein speaking mostly, but they may not be simultaneous. But if you're separate, we actually with cell phones, with these crazy things, we get delays all the time, and that's not unusual. And it's going around the world off a satellite. Who knows what it's doing, because it is a neural net, or it is a network. And people often attribute supernatural meanings to some coincidental events, such as prayer being answered. And I don't want to step anybody's toes here, but I mean, that's one of the things that he said, well, this happened. It's usually anecdotal information. It's their prayers were answered. And people make that a solid connection. And that is in the Carl Jung kind of sense. These two things, they pray, something happens. And my friend, I won't say who it is, some of you know him, but he would pray for getting a parking space close to where we wanted to go. And it would happen. Well, when I got that, and I got 3 or 4 of them in a row, I said, it's just clean living. And that's not necessarily true. So anyway, in the world, scientific community, causal world connections can occur often. And new ideas can become viral upon hearing just the idea. If it makes sense to what you think is real, and your little internal model is there, it could happen. So we are pretty much at the end, and I would like to close with this. It's an Irish blessing. May love and laughter light your days and warm your heart and home. May good and faithful friends be yours where'er you may roam. May peace and plenty bless your world with joy that long endures. May all life's passing season bring the best to you and yours.